A study in the journal Nature Climate Change finds climate disasters have worsened more than half of the hundreds of known infectious diseases that affect people. Disasters such as flooding, heat waves, and drought were found to impact diseases like malaria, hantavirus, cholera, and anthrax. Doctors dating back to Hippocrates have long connected disease to weather, but this study shows how widespread the influence of climate is on human health. Researchers also determined that 223 of the 286 human illnesses, including non-infectious conditions such as asthma, allergies, and even animal bites, seem to be worsened by climate hazards. Well, joining us now to tell us more about how climate can impact health is Dr. Abhishek Raut, Medical Director at Appletree Medical Group. Dr. Raut, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Pleasure to be here.
So, very interesting topic today. What would you say are the main takeaways from this study?
Well, I think the findings of this story are terrifying and illustrate the enormous consequences that climate change can happen on human pathogens. As you mentioned, we saw climate hazards such as flooding, heat waves, and drought worsen more than half of hundreds of known infectious diseases in people. But in addition to infectious diseases, they had looked at other non-infectious diseases, asthma, allergies, even animal bites, to see if there was any hazard or increase there. And as you mentioned, most of the illnesses were significantly worsened by climate hazards.
And these findings were quite surprising to me, Dr. Raut. We mentioned that many doctors already knew about the effects of climate disasters on health, but why is this still not widely known?
I think it's an established fact, especially in the medical community, that the burning of coal, oil, and natural gas can lead to these more frequent, intense, extreme weather. And there's been research that shows that the weather patterns have been associated with many health issues. The problem that a lot of people point out is correlation is not causation. So with studies like this, it's hard to really quantify the extent in which the hazards reviewed actually changed over the time period and the extent in which these changes attribute directly to those human changes.
All right, so let's talk about the direct impact that climate disasters have on diseases that are both non-infectious and infectious, Dr. Raut.
All right, great. So I think the most important thing we can take here is we can see that certain diseases like malaria are exacerbated in those cases there. The lead study author themselves, Camila Mora, noticed that in his own place in rural Colombia, he had a flood, and he describes in his own first-time recent memory of the water filling his living room. This flood ended up being an ideal breeding ground for mosquitoes, which certainly can worsen things like malaria outbreaks. For himself, he actually contracted chikungunya, which is a nasty virus spread by mosquito bites. And even though he survived, he still feels those joint pains years later. So that's how we see those connections here between climate changes, floodings, and directly into things like animal bites or insect bites causing these human disasters.
All right, Dr. Raut, bringing this back home to our viewers, we know Canada is no stranger to heat waves, and we've experienced multiple heat warnings this summer. So how do extreme heat circumstances impact the overall health of people?
Right. So heat can affect quite a bit. It's surprising. Heat can also affect mental health and community well-being. What we see in occurrences of mood disorders, anxiety disorders, and dementia, and psychological distress, which has been shown to increase when you have increased heat as well. So heat can have such an impact on interpersonal relationships as well. We've seen studies on things like domestic violence and violent crimes that have been shown to spike during these heat waves there.
And did this study by any chance look into how climate disasters affect the impact of COVID-19 on a general population?
Yes. So Mora had originally wanted to look at things such as COVID-19 and see how it would impact disasters. Interestingly, the study found that extreme weather exacerbated and also diminished certain chances of COVID-19. For instance, extreme heat in poor areas had people congregate in order to cool off. And then unfortunately get exposed to COVID-19. But in other situations, heavy downpours actually reduced COVID spread because people stayed at home and indoors away from each other.
All right, Dr. Raut, a quick 45 seconds left here, but what should officials take away from the study here?
I think the key messages here is that climate change affects the social and environmental determinants of health, clean water, safe drinking water, sufficient food, and shelter. So all of these studies are showing that direct impact on infectious and non-infectious disease. So really focusing on greener infrastructure now will in fact result in improved health for Canadians in the future.
Always an informative interview, Dr. Raut. Thank you again for your time today.
Thanks so much for having me.